I have certain people who come over to the house and they say, what's the weirdest whiskey you have? What's the most bizarre whiskey? I've tried the normal stuff. Give me something really interesting. And that's what this video is about. The 10 weirdest, bizarre, most interesting whiskeys from my collection. So if you have a bunch of bottles that are pretty similar and you want a weird one, this is the video to watch. So give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already. Most of you who watch my channel aren't subscribed, but don't know why. Hit subscribe. And let's jump in. You see, with whiskey, it's very easy to stay in your lane, whether that's a bottle you keep going back to, a distillery you go back to, or maybe even a country. Maybe you only have whiskies from Scotland, maybe you only have whiskies from the United States, and you don't know how diverse whiskey can be. And I'm a big fan of exploring the whole like logo and the first fill whiskey thing with the sperm whale. The reason I like what that's animal represents is it dives down like 2Ks under the ocean and fights giant squid in the darkness. Like, I like it. It's about exploring the unknown. Okay, we're going to start kind of safe and then slowly get more and more weird. Okay, by the end, it'll be so weird, like you won't even know who you are. You'll be like, who am I? Am I an alien? That's the kind of questions you'll be asking at the end of this video. And we're going to start off with the first whiskey, which is from Scotland. It's from Islay. But a few years ago, this would have been very strange because they used their own version of barley. Pretty much in Scotland, all of them were basically using the same type of barley, the same type of yeast even, like distillers yeast, just because it was very efficient and making alcohol and all this sort of stuff. But there's a lot of distilleries now that are choosing flavour over efficiency. So worse for like the accounts, better for flavour, or maybe not even better for flavour, just a different flavour. So this one here was one of the first distilleries to kind of jump on that train, the Bruichladdich Islay Barley. My favourite is actually the Port Charlotte Islay Barley. I'm a huge fan of that, but this just is like turns up that farminess. And so if you've watched my how to make whiskey video, you'll know that the first stage is the barley. That's your core ingredient. Different types of barley are going to influence the rest of the process. And probably not to the same extreme that different grape varieties, because we go through a distillation and then a cask process. But Islay barley, it's from farms from Islay. The question is the difference between barley types? And I would say from what I've had from Bruichladdich, from Kilchoman, from Lochlee, barley types make a big difference. Really interesting. Super like dry, not sweet at all. Very savory whiskey. So some people I've given this to haven't liked it. But other people I've given it to are like, this is incredible. So it kind of depends. Maybe you do like to stay within the Scotch lane. You want to try just a twist on it. Rather than trying the normal classic laddie, try the Islay Barley. And let's jump into the next weird whiskey. All right, we're staying in kind of weird, but not super weird yet. We'll get to the super weird. The two most common casks within single malt is the ex-bourbon cask, which is like 70% of them, and the ex-sherry cask, which is probably like another 20%. I would say that last 10% is going to be everything else. In that everything else like category, a few years ago, there was a lot of backlash towards all these red wine casks coming out. People thought it was too astringent, didn't work. A lot of it, yeah, it doesn't work. Like you imagine you pour wine and whiskey into a glass, probably won't taste that great. You pour sherry and single malt into a glass, kind of works. Wine, not so much. So it's all about finding that right spirit that works with the right kind of whiskey. It's a bit like blue cheese and honey, right? They go great together. You wouldn't think it, but they are amazing together. And I have found this with a lot of whiskies that are aged in Rioja casks from the Tempranillo grape. I always get a bit of a spiciness from it. Last year, my whiskey of the year was the Lechague Rioja cask. Fantastic whiskey. A lot of you love it. And this one here also is in a Rioja cask. It's from Glenallachie. They're from Speyside. They're often known as like a very sort of rich and round and spiced kind of sherry cask type distillery. They're known for like exploring all these different cask types, whereas this one uses a cask finish using Rioja casks, which just adds that little bit of spiciness. When I used to live in London, I remember on Friday nights, I'd go to Tesco's and it was always like one of those, what is it, Campo, whatever it is, Tempranillo, Rioja wines. Loved it. There's just a heaviness, a spiciness, deep red fruits. And that's what is right here. You got the nice kind of malty, single malt, biscuity side. And then behind it is all that velvety, rich pepper, rich fruits. I don't know if they're still doing the Rioja cask, but I think in general, just look out for it. It's weird. It's interesting. I think it works. So I just needed to tell you about today's sponsor, which has made this video possible, and that is Pre-Alcohol by ZBiotics. As you know, I'm a big fan of drinking responsibly, quality over quantity, and drinking for all the amazing flavors. But sometimes, like when a bunch of mates are coming around, or a tasting, or a festival, it can sneak up on you. So that's why I always hydrate, like a lot, with a massive water bottle, get lots of sleep, and I sometimes have a Pre-Alcohol by ZBiotics. It's a genetically engineered probiotic made by PhD scientists designed to break down the byproduct of alcohol that builds up in your gut. And that byproduct is what can leave you feeling off the next day. So if you do want to try it, click on my link in the description for 15% off, free shipping, and if you're still not really that sure or that convinced, there is a money back guarantee. Now let's get back to whiskey. Okay, but staying in that lane, if you do really want to go down like the wine cask lane, I recently was sent this. To be honest, I hadn't even heard of them. They're like from Tasmania, and it's from the distillery called Spring Bay from Tasmania. This one's the ex-bourbon cask, but the one that really kind of caught my attention, and unfortunately it is very expensive, so you might not be able to get it, but I think this is probably the best I've ever seen a Chardonnay cask work with a whiskey. So what is a Chardonnay? Big, bold, white wine. Kind of the key ingredient, if I was to pick one ingredient from a Chardonnay compared to other white wines, is buttery. Think your normal kind of light and fruity single malts. So you've got kind of the white fruits and vanilla going on. And this has that, but underneath it is that just so much butter, like it's like on toast and the butter's melted. Such a small amount that I've got that I don't want to finish it. That's good stuff. Okay, we're going back to Scotland, some weird and interesting whiskies that I think are fantastic and break a lot of the rules. We're actually going back to Bruichladdich, and this whiskey is known as the most peated whiskey on all of, I don't know, whiskey world. The thing is though, it is really expensive, but I will say, like when someone comes around, they're like, I want a peated whiskey, but give me something that's the most punchy, most different. This is number one. If you got the money, great, but I have the Octomore. I actually have the 7.1, which is quite an old release now. I think it's one of the last ones of Jim McEwen had when he was like running the show there. This one's bottled at 59.5%, real punchy. Only 5 years old, but man, this is definitely a bizarre, interesting whiskey. Oh yeah, it is just pinnacle whiskey for me. It wouldn't be an always on the shelf whiskey. It's not a perma shelf whiskey, definitely not. It is a special whiskey. So my one is 208 ppm, which I've talked about before in my peated whiskey video, that doesn't actually mean a lot because you can't really compare ppm. They measure the ppm at the start of the process, but depending on where you make your cuts, what cask you age in, the way you distill it, the reflux, kind of can mess all those numbers up, but this is still really peaty. It's like those bacon notes, smoky, salty barbecue, like beach bonfire, but there is a cheesiness behind it, almost like a aged Comte or Manchego. Okay, the next whiskey on this list is kind of in that same category. It's getting more expensive. I talked about it being my ultimate gift whiskey, and you'll see why. It is the Glenmorangie Cygnus. Just in terms of like the ultimate gift, the presentation is similar to what you find in like those real fancy like 30-year-old whiskeys, but you can get it for the price of around your average 18-year-old. But what's really interesting about this is they use roasted chocolate malt. If someone said to me, I want a whiskey that tastes like dark chocolate coffee beans, that's pretty specific, or just coffee, or just dark chocolate, it's this. I do know in some places it's more expensive. Like in New Zealand, like even between shops, there can be $100 difference. But if you can pick it up at a good price, or you just want one luxurious whiskey, this is really different. It breaks the rules. I don't know why more people don't do chocolate malt. I think it would do so well. It's good stuff. So this is getting pretty weird now. We get into the weird category. This is a really interesting whiskey. In fact, I actually had it with Charlie McLean when I did the interview with him. It's from Peru. If you think of corn whiskey, what's corn whiskey? It's basically bourbon, right? It has to be a minimum 50% corn. You get a lot of that kind of like sweet flavors, maple syrup, brown sugar, all that sort of thing you find in bourbon. There are different types of corns. In fact, a lot of different types of corns. And in Peru, you actually have corn types that are like native to the area, some really interesting types. And one type of corn is called the black corn. And that's what this is. The black whiskey. I've just got a small sample of it. It is really, really interesting stuff. It kind of reminds you of American bourbon, but in a different way. It's like the weird cousin, but it doesn't have like the same level of like big vanillas and toasted kind of oak and that sort of thing. There's a lot more of like almost like a ginger or like some sort of licorice notes going on with it. Now let's jump into probably the most interesting category. Now, one of the biggest categories within Scotch whisky and single malt is peated whisky. I've done a whole video on the Isle of Islay, while it's so interesting what it is, peat. That flavour, back in the day, was seen as really strange, really different. There's like interviews where like the old distiller of Lafroig is like, people don't actually drink this neat. This is like an ingredient, like salt or pepper.
Islay whisky by itself is rather too powerful for most people, though some people do like it as a liqueur whisky. It's very good, as I said, for blending, so it's sent to the blending house.
These days, as a lot of you know, peated whisky is a lot of people's favourite whisky. So it's really interesting how something that, 25, 30 years ago would have been on this list as something that's breaking the rules, really weird, really interesting. But there are kind of distilleries doing the same thing again, not just using like peat, like from Islay, but peat from other countries. One here is, this is the Moss from Whiskey Whiskey. It uses New Zealand peat. When New Zealand's at one side of the planet, Scotland's at the other. It's completely different plants. They've broken down. The peat's quite different. So this uses New Zealand peat. But there's kind of other kind of stuff happening. Like in New Zealand, there's Thompson, which use Manuka smoke. So we smoke a lot of fish here in New Zealand with Manuka wood. It's a native New Zealand tree. They decided to do that with their whiskey. Really interesting stuff. In fact, of all my whiskies, when people come around like, I want to try something weird, this is probably the one I pour the most to them because there's nothing like off-putting about it. It's good, nice, interesting whiskey. It just adds a flavour note you don't see in other whiskies. Probably the most interesting and weird whiskey I've probably got is this one here, and it's actually from Finland. Find it in a lot of places, and it is the Cairo Malt Rye Whiskey Wood Smoke. So very similar to the Thompson, but using one of their own wood varieties. It's also rye, so if you think in Finland, they actually have a lot of rye in Finland already for their bread and that sort of stuff.
Make a whiskey that is simply unlike anything that you've tasted before.
And so I guess these guys were like, well, why is there not like a really famous rye whiskey from Finland? Yeah, I had a bunch of people around to my house and had a bunch of whiskeys, and I threw this in the middle of it. And all of them were like, yeah, that's great, that's nice, dried fruits and light fruits. Oh, that's a nice peaty one. And we're going along, and I threw this in the middle. And this got a reaction. Like, this stopped the conversation because it's so different. Because you got the rye, which, I mean, this is going to be bad to say. It's almost like a little bit like paint-ish in kind of a good way-ish. In New Zealand, we have this thing called Play-Doh. Most kids like grow up with it. It's like a very salty kind of like squishy thing you can make things out of. This reminds me of it for some reason. It's like this sort of salty baking spices. Look, I will say this might not be to my palate. Like, if people want something really weird and I want to show them something really interesting, bizarre, breaking the rules, this is definitely one of the top whiskies. I find it actually goes really well in old fashions because for me, having it neat is almost too intense and like how different and out there it is. But in an old fashioned, it adds, like, by the time you add the sugar syrup and the bitters and all that sort of thing, the flavors of that outer kind of smoked wood coming through just adds a really interesting twist on an old fashioned. But I'm keen to know from you, what are some of the really interesting, bizarre whiskies breaking all the rules that are pushing out your comfort zones, and maybe ones that you've actually really enjoyed? Leave a comment down below. I'm always keen to try new stuff, and if you want more videos like this, give this video a like, subscribe, thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. But above all, share and enjoy.